And yeah, we're recording something today to talk about the Hospice UK report, which I've got right behind me here, all set up. I Just Want to Be Me, which came out a little while ago, but has been received very well in Wales and NHS Wales, and I've sort of certainly, as a lead for advanced and future care planning in Wales, spread it and communicated it quite a bit. And I thought maybe today would be a nice opportunity to record a conversation with yourselves as people who are very involved with this report, and to sort of see what the key areas are. So without much further ado, I'll let you introduce yourselves. Ellie, do you want to make a start?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Liv. I am the Senior Policy and Public Affairs Officer at Hospice UK. And I wrote the majority of the I Just Want to Be Me report, and was involved in all the research behind it.
And I'm Ellie Kane, my pronouns are she, her, and I am a consultant in palliative care at Marie Curie Hospice in Bradford. I am a trans woman, and I was working with Liv to try and make the report as good as it could be, but most of the effort is hers, so I won't take any credit for it at all.
And Ellie wrote the foreword, which you should take credit for.
Yeah. I mean, I often sort of see reports and get reports, but I must say this was one of the more significant ones where it just had an impact, and actually I learned something from it, I felt. You see so many reports and it sort of maybe confirms a few things that you already know. But, I took a lot of learning from it, especially from, I felt some of the commentary from people who had lived experience and had gone through different things in life. If I may, I mean, one of the things that struck me a lot was the experience of older people who had gone through a lot of stigma earlier on in life, and were still carrying that with them in a society where I would argue now, naively perhaps, where there is more understanding of such matters. So that really struck me. I don't know, Liv, if you wanted to sort of comment on that at all.
Yeah, I think we like to think of things like LGBTQ plus and trans acceptance as kind of a linear line of constant improvement, but I think it's much more of a zigzag of peaks and troughs, and when it becomes kind of a subject of political interest, things tend to get messy. So I think now is actually a time where it's quite unpredictable, and it's probably a time when, from what we heard in the report especially, people had a lot of anxiety of you just can't know whether someone is going to be, completely normal and accepting of you, or whether they're going to be discriminatory or take some kind of unpredictable action. So it's I think things obviously have changed, and there are more research in place and hopefully more clinical understanding. But I think we're still in a time where I don't imagine any trans or gender diverse patient can enter a service and feel sure that they're going to have a completely fair and inclusive experience.
Yeah, and I think maybe just to add to that, I think there's a lot of research done about this idea of anticipatory discrimination. So the expectation that people from the LGBTQ plus community, and trans people in particular, will experience discrimination. And it makes people from the community present much later because they're fearful, and they're much less likely to engage because they don't know whether they're going to be welcome. And you have to remember that the average age of a especially palliative care patient is someone in their 70s. If you take back to when they're in their 20s and you think about what things were like at that time, if they went to their GP and they came out as trans, then there's every chance they would have been sent to psychiatry. They may have experienced electroconvulsive conversion therapy. They may have experienced psychotherapeutic conversion therapy. And actually what the community's gone through historically, and then add in things like the AIDS pandemic, where they were very much isolated and pariahed, means that in general, the experience of the community of healthcare professionals is incredibly negative. And I think one of the, and that kind of speaks to, because one of the things that often gets said to me is, well, why do we have to do anything special for different groups of people? And it's like, well, actually, because we have, as a profession and as a group of workers, historically, we have traumatized this group of people. So now we have to make extra effort to build that bridge to make them want to come to our care. And that's the historical, but then you add in the current climate where there is quite a lot of attention on trans and gender diverse people, for want of a polite way of putting it. And there's real fear that actually they will experience negative healthcare outcomes. And the 2018 LGBT survey showed that about 40 to 45% of trans people had experienced negative input from healthcare professionals, and that's direct negative. So what's happening behind the scenes is like probably even more, and that's 40% of trans people are saying that a healthcare professional has been negative towards them. That's not great.
No, that's right. And then with my hat of being a palliative care doctor, but also working as sort of lead for advanced and future care planning for Wales, lead for DNA CPR, and working with compassionate communities, Cymru as well, compassionate Cymru. That also makes me sort of think that immediately sort of I'm, you don't know the past experience of the person who you're talking to, and then I may sort of go in the usual way that I might go in with someone who's got a life-limiting illness, who's got a terminal illness, who's under the palliative care team, so talking about ceilings of treatment and talking about treatments that would be acceptable, not acceptable in DNA CPR. But of course, I don't know what's going on in that person's mind, and they might feel, oh, yeah, he's just doing the old DNR talk now, and he's doing that because of the person that I am. That would be so horrific to me if I knew that was going on in that person's mind. And of course, it might be, so that is something that, was quite, shocking to me in a sense, that already sort of on that have to be, incredibly sensitive to that.
Yeah, and I think that's just that's the skills of palliative care in general, isn't it? And people often get quite worried and anxious about communities that are not that familiar with, but fundamentally, at the end of the day, we're all individuals with a lived experience and a worldview. And some trans people will have consistent experience across the group, but actually, just like anybody, every trans person's lived experience is different. So and what I would say to people who are worried about putting their foot in it or getting it wrong around that is just treat them like you would any other patient, and that is try and understand what their fears and what their concerns are, and then address them just as you would anyone else. And I don't think particularly in that sense you need special treatment around it, but it is something they will be fearful of.
Yeah, and I sort of agree with that, because I think as soon as you start giving special treatment to some people or treating some groups differently, then you can get the negatives from that as well. So you might even, I might even then conclude, oh, maybe I better not discuss better end of life care planning with that person, and that's unfair as well, because I would with someone else, and I would sort of plan where would you prefer to be in the last weeks of your life, and who would be there, and how would we coordinate your care, and what things would we do. All of those other areas that run in parallel with DNA CPR and future care planning conversations, don't they? And then you might miss out on those aspects as well, just for fear of offending, just for fear of making that person feel uncomfortable from those perspectives.
Yeah, that was something we heard a lot in the report, was that there's kind of a massive group of people working in palliative and end-of-life care and bereavement that in no way want to actively discriminate against trans and gender diverse people, but are so scared of getting it wrong that they are discriminating because they're not talking to them in the same way, or they're avoiding them because they're scared that they're going to use the wrong pronouns or misgender them, which misgendering someone is not a good thing, but people can tell when it's an accident. And if you genuinely apologize and can move on and make the change, it's not going to be the end of the world, and you can build a really trusting relationship from that. A lot of the time it's not about, you may have to have additional considerations when treating a trans or gender diverse patient, but a lot of these kind of conversations and recommendations we made are things that would be good for any conversation. Asking someone what their preferred name is, which may be different to their legal name. If someone asked me that, that would be great, because my name is Olivia. Everyone calls me Liv. So, you know, it's not a conversation that, it's not a question that can only benefit trans and gender diverse people. Having these conversations and considering how different people may experience care and different needs is something that I think is part of the ethos of palliative and end of life care, and should extend to considering trans and gender diverse people as much as possible.
And you know, Ellie will know this, but part of our role in palliative care is to make ourselves a bit redundant in a sense, and export good palliative and end of life care to everyone else in a way, ideally. I mean, we're not doing that well on that side of things, I think, and I think we're still needed for a few years. But yeah, for instance, I talked not too long ago to the Welsh medical examiners. The Welsh Medical Examiner Service. So, and they was very interested in advanced and future care planning and DNA CPR. But I heard from them, which I also thought was very interesting, is that they were very interested in the report, and they've, you know, even towards the end of life and after someone has died, there's a lot of misgendering that goes on, and they're really concerned about that and how to address that, and how to improve on that area. Is that something that you've come across at all?
Yeah, that was one of the sections in the report was on planning for the end of life and planning for post-death and memorialization. It was something that a lot of people said that their plans were impacted by the fact they were trans and gender diverse, and feeling like they needed to jump through so many hoops and try and put so many things in place to make sure that unsupportive people in their life didn't take responsibility for their care or their funeral, and that their body was cared for by people that were respectful and understood them. And it was something that was really prominent in people's minds, and it's also something that there's a really unequal level of understanding of what is meant to be done, what can be done. There's a really unequal level of what protections people can access. So one individual that is mentioned in the report was particularly worried because they couldn't marry their partner because they were non-binary, and to do so they would have to, on their marriage certificate, it would have to say male or female, and they didn't want to pose as an incorrect gender for the sake of the certificate. But it meant that they didn't have that reassurance of knowing that their partner was their legal spouse and kind of first contact, and would get to make those decisions. And so there's even within, we talk about trans and gender diverse communities, but within that there's such a range of experience and a range of different biases and different fears for lots of different reasons.
And I think, you know, on top of that, part of the actual ceremony and process of these things is you have to be called wife or husband according to your legal gender, and to actually go through a process where somebody is literally there saying husband when you're clearly a trans woman and wife, like, why are you going to put yourself through that? Like, it's just traumatizing. It's just not good, and it's not necessary. And I think the similar thing for death certification as well is that there's definitely a kind of belief that unless somebody has a gender recognition certificate, then they should have their sex that they were assigned at birth. But there is it's not a clear legal area, but there is some guidance from the chief coroner in England that actually if somebody was clearly living as one particular gender, then it should be documented on their death certificate as that gender, regardless of their GRC status. So I think that's just a really important thing for clinicians to know, is that actually you can just put the sex that somebody was rather than what their original birth certificate may have said, if you believe that to be a true representation of the life that they had.
Yeah, I think that goes for names as well. It can, some people worry about, because potentially if bank accounts were in previous names and things, but there's nothing stopping you on forms to say the person's lived current name,
Yeah.
previously known as, just to ensure that the legal things work fine. You don't need to exclude their actual identity for the
Yeah.
sake of this legal form.
Yeah. I work with the European Association for Palliative Care, who sometimes have a link in with the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization recently updated their definition of palliative care, which I hadn't particularly loved beforehand, and I would have made quite a few changes with. But they updated it to something that I wasn't particularly enamored with either, because they always kind of talk about the patient and the family. You know, and I know that many people don't necessarily identify that greatly with their family or have a legal partner as such. And so I found that a bit I found that a bit troublesome, I must say. And
I think
whatever I sort of write about, whenever we write the DNA CPR policy for Wales, for instance, we always speak of those important to the patient. Is that a good terminology, or is there a better term to use? What is your view?
I think that is probably the best way of putting it, that would capture everything. And I think, you know, for advanced care planning, for bereavement support, it is worth knowing that people from the trans and gender diverse community are less likely to have significant social links because of discrimination and alienation from their genetic family. But in the community, we have this concept of chosen family. So in literature towards the LGBTQ community, I would talk about chosen family generally, because that's what we talk about. And those are people that through one reason or another have become as though family to us.
Yeah.
And actually one of my I would call her my sister. She's not genetically related to me, but I would see her as needing being as important as anybody else, and I would really want her involved in my care. And I think that's an important thing to be aware of, is that generally, even though they may not be a blood relative, they are chosen family, and you should treat them as such. And I think chosen family, those important to you, is really important way of putting it.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of chosen family, but I've heard it before actually, and it's actually quite a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Great. I know we're sort of nearing sort of 30 minutes now, and there's lots of other things we could discuss, because it's a really fascinating topic, but I also want to keep it sort of short and concise, and link people to this excellent report as well, where you can do a lot of further reading. So I wanted to say a really big thank you to both of you, Ellie and Liv, for giving your time up today for talking to me here, and hopefully people who watch this will find this a really useful resource. I know I'll be spreading it and getting people to watch it, including my medical students and various others, and I've got a QR code with all the learning resources, so they can see it. But big thank you to both of you today. Thank you.
Very happy to.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.